Hello, this is the Creation of Self podcast. The Creation of Self, which is based upon this book, The Creation of Self, A Case for the Soul, written by me. And in this podcast, we'll have a series of episodes. The first series of episodes will include a summary of the book and the arguments therein, and we'll look at um, some of the common objections to the soul and some of the common ideas in favor of the soul, just to make the public aware of um, the soul, its evidences, and its importance in contemporary discussions more broadly, as this is something important to me. But it's also, there's not too many podcasts that are doing this exactly and showcasing the rationale, the coherence of the soul itself. So, looking specifically at some of the arguments, and not only that, showing its importance in contemporary discussions as it is vital at the moment. The Creation of Self, Case for the Soul, I wrote. It was motivated by an intuition that I had about um, the fact that we are souls, or as substance dualists would call it, we are soul body compounds of some sort, that we are comprised of souls and bodies. And that's the position called substance dualism, commonly associated with Rene Descartes, but also associated with earlier thinkers, arguably Plato, Augustine, John Calvin in the Reformed tradition, as well as Thomas Aquinas, very likely was something of a dualist, not quite of the brand that Descartes and his Platonic inheritance gives us, but a dualist nonetheless. And when I began thinking about this in my doctoral work, I had this intuition that there is something about the soul that requires a causal explanation that exists beyond a sort of physical framework, or even more broadly, the sort of natural framework or naturalistic framework in which we um, exist, or which at least our bodies, our biological organisms exist. And I think that intuition is basically right. And it's something that I began thinking about uh, over and over again over the years, since my doctoral work in particular. And this intuition started to turn into an argument that I ran by various philosophers over the years, since about 2012, actually, various philosophers, that there is some sort of causal explanation that is necessary to explain the soul, and not just a broadly theistic explanation, although that's true, and I argue that in the book, that there is a need for a theistic explanation. Um, um, that in order to make sense of the whole universe in which there are rational creatures, we need God to explain that, but also a more direct causal explanation in God himself, or something like God, a supernatural being of the sort. And so this intuition stood with me and stayed with me, and I discussed this intuition since 2012 with a variety of philosopher friends, Talifer, Richard Swinburne, Bruce Gordon, and my own host, supervisor, Oliver Crisp, and many others over the years. And that particular intuition developed into an argument, and that argument was came out in this book, The Creation of Self. And in it, I argue um, it's kind of a partly mainstream, partly academic, and I give some of the general evidences that I see as a coherent sort of cumulative case for the soul in the beginning. That's for the sort of the mainstream intellectual reader. But then from there, I develop um, the intuition out further in arguing against various views that suggest that we as persons are material beings through and through, that we are basically just our bodies or our animals, or our human being itself, and that I argue that that sort of position actually is directly confronted with certain evidential uh, reasons that would favor, in fact, something like substance dualism, the idea that I am a soul body composite. And further, that because the material or natural process, biological process is insufficient for accounting for personal identity. In fact, something else is required, it seems, something like an agential cause, an agent itself, something like a supernatural being, an intelligent agent, even something like a god or God himself. And so that becomes the occupation of the book, the argument that I give herein. And so it's an argument that some of the naturalistic or pseudo-naturalistic explanations, causal explanations for how it is that humans come into being or minds come into being are themselves insufficient explanations. And that seems right. Once we take seriously the fact of first-person perspectives and we take seriously the fact of consciousness and the kind of consciousness that we as human beings have, um, and the various properties or features that are characteristic of our own consciousness, then we are confronted with the fact that um, that is something that is not just a property or a capacity that could be had by an animal or a material being or a body, but it's something that itself is substantial itself. It must be substantial. And for it to be substantial, it it well, effectively it must be a substantial kind of thing that's other than the body, something other than the physical being or aggregate that makes this up, the animal body itself. It must be something other that is the carrier of these certain unique kinds of properties, these certain unique kinds of properties of consciousness, first person consciousness. And so when we take that seriously, then some sort of causal story or explanation is necessarily required for that. But that radically re-envisions how we think of persons and persons in their place in the universe. It radically re-envisions the fact that some other causal explanation is required of them. It forces us to transform not only how we see the individual, but also how we see the cosmos itself in relation to us. And so the implications of this, if it's true, are profound and quite massive. And so in this way, the creation of self is offering something of a perspective, a vision of reality itself, a reality that begins with taking seriously ourselves. As Socrates says, know thyself, beginning with the self, knowing thyself, and arriving at a kind of an understanding of what material beings are and what conscious beings are, and the differences therein. And those differences at a local level have wide and massive applications and implications for how we view the cosmos itself. And so it can't be, I don't think, understated. And so this argument um, that I develop here is not just about the soul, although it is. Um, if you look online and you look for souls, ideas, soul body dualism itself isn't all that popular or even all that hot today, you might say. But when we situate it in this wider framework of, well, this is how we understand the cosmos, this is how we understand um, God, and that there is a God in the cosmos or related to the cosmos in some way, and ourselves in relation to God, well, it has these massive implications for it. And it has implications for other areas that are or do have resonance with us that are hot topics today in terms of how we think about science generally, brain sciences, neuroscience, cognitive science, biological sciences, even chemistry. It has massive implications for how we think about those things, insofar as there's something about the nature of the universe itself that is essentially made sense of by mind or minds, and that is rooted in or grounded in the fact of a mind. And so when we take that seriously, then um, this whole notion of the soul as being some quaint idea or antiquated idea that's not all that exciting right now. It's not all that exciting in the if you look at the Scientific American, ironically, you won't see anybody defending this. As far as I haven't found any. And certainly, if you do find somebody defending this sort of view, this idea, they wouldn't be doing so as also defending God or defending a theistic view, because it's out of place, it's out of court, so it's not acceptable in their eyes. But it holds a viable place in the history of intellectual thought and in recent discussions in contemporary philosophy as we look again fresh at neuroscience itself. It forces us down this line in this direction. It forces us to go there. We are confronted with these realities that are hard to um, ignore altogether, as it often is, and to treat the soul as kind of this idea that's not all that exciting, or it's rather boring. But when we realize this, we realize no, it's just not the case. The fact is that um, it it completely kind of revolutionizes kind of the paradigm in which we are working with when we think about the world, reality, universe itself, and our place in it altogether in a way that disrupts what are the common narratives in science, or at least popular science, where this idea is almost completely ignored. So stay with me, come back, we'll talk about the creation of self further.